Num num. Birdie num num.
And we are live. Of course, as soon as I hit the live button, there were 33 people viewing the video. What a shocker. And it reminds me today, I was reading from Plotinus. I have this obsession with Plotinus and his war against the Gnostics, and where he decides to unload on the Gnostics and call them idiots and all that is his Treatise 33. So it's all over the place, but regardless, welcome everybody to AB Live. So excited to be here, excited to see you joining the chat, and it's going to be a great evening. Welcome to the desert of the real. And yes, heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. And this is a world, as you know, where men still have nipples, and so it is. But we do what we can. And very excited tonight for a guest who also comes from the lawful and frigid dystopia of Chicago, and that is Thomas Negovan. Thomas, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, guys, for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. And with us, too, we have the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Okay, if I can remember to take off my mute, which I finally did tonight.
Good. Awesome. Well, no mutes here. I guess first we should do a little, as they say, housekeeping. As always, for those of you in the chat room, if you have questions for Thomas or myself or Vance, please write them in all caps. Put as many question marks as you are able. And we will get to your questions in time, outside of time, aeonic time. Also, too, as always, this show, as soon as it's done, will be on YouTube. And tomorrow I will put it on all podcast providers, the audio. And I usually put a cool bonus for patrons, AB Prime members, and Red Circle subscribers. So you get full context of things. Always a good stuff in the archives, and always love to share with you. And something I should say too, which I haven't said in a while, obviously these are tough times for many people. Obviously this is an apocalypse of many kinds. As James True says, the best apocalypse ever. But these are times where many people are struggling. So the offer is always open. If any of you really engages with the content and you want the full show or the full AB Live show, just let me know. I'm always glad to just give it to you on the house. If you need it, I'm ready to give it to you, and it's never an issue. Other than that, as always, we got tonight's going to be a very cool show. We have some great shows coming on next. Next week, we've got Jason Reza Giorgiani, who's going to discuss his book, Closer Encounters. And it really blows up the whole alien extraterrestrial arena with some incredible new findings and research about what's going on in outer space.
Grand unified theory.
Yes, a grand unified theory of UFOs. And if you thought things were bad or Gnostic, wait till you hear this interview. It's almost like the Sethians are coming down from Coke. That's how intense it is. It makes John Keel or Charles Fort look like Disney writers. So intense stuff, but an incredible interview. And after that, we will have a double feature show on Neoplatonism and theurgy with two scholars, or one scholar and one researcher, that will give you a whole, not just summary of these competitors of the Gnostics, these off-worlders who also believed in Gnosis, but gives new insights and dimensions, and also practical exercise that you can use now. So a lot of great content coming, and I thank you all for being here and supporting the show. But enough of this, enough of my drivel, as I say often. Thomas, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become interested Well, I guess which came first, chicken egg, the art or the esoterica? How did things go with you?
I mean, they're so intertwined. I think
Yeah.
that uh, probably it was probably the aesthetics first. Because even when I think about Art Nouveau, the first time that I saw Art Nouveau, I saw these images in a book, and they looked to me like what I thought, an otherworldly landscape would look like, because that nature had encroached so much upon reality, and lamps that looked like tendrils and things like that. And so I think that when I was younger, I had an inclination toward the more mystical thinking, but it was the aesthetics that were probably more the entry point, because I was raised Roman Catholic, so there was not a lot of it wasn't like I grew up in California or something like that. So yeah, so it was the art first, and then getting into writings, and definitely um the more fantastic thinking of a lot of science fiction and fantasy writers kind of nudged me toward that. And then probably it was in my 20s when I got interested a little more academically in the Yakuburma universe and things like that.
Yeah, the mystical art, which we shall get into. And what I guess what part of Chicago are you from, or more like what church did your parents go to?
Yeah, that's what they ask in Chicago. What parish are you from? Is that I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I did have a stint in Michigan for a while, but it was I grew up near Midway Airport and lived there until I was a young adult, and then I lived up north, as all people of a certain ilk. It's very working class on the south side of
Hmm.
Chicago. So if you're interested in
Hmm.
the art, kind of migrate north. And then about 10 years ago, moved out to Los Angeles. So I've been out here for the past decade. But I miss Chicago as an emotional place. But as you, I'm sure hear everybody say, do not miss the weather.
No, the summers are great, but yeah, I'm no longer in Chicago, and I don't miss it at all anyway. So I don't. Yeah, that's another story. Another story. And for the audience, yeah, for the audience, what are you doing in LA these days? I guess when we talked on the phone, I envy you because you rub shoulders with all these cool cats that I admire, like Grant Morrison and Clive Barker. I'm like, how did you live the dream? I mean, you were reading comics as a kid, and now you're hanging out with these exemplars.
I think that the when I kind of came up and I got into the world of antique dealing, there's a very decorative element to it, where people are looking at finding people with money that want something that has a lot of blue in it, or a vase that's a certain shape. And my interest was always way more into the ideologies behind the work. And so I was having a hard time as an art dealer connecting with the audience. The pieces that I was really emotionally attracted to would never sell. And then a piece that was very fluffy, like a pretty woman or something, would always sell really quickly. And so as I was building this kind of arsenal of an inventory of symbolist art, um, I was reading the Bud Plant art books catalog. Bud Plant has been dealing in art books for decades and decades. And there was a book on an artist named Carlo Schwab. He did the poster for the first Salon Rosicrucian exhibition. But he was a fantastic symbolist. And there's this beautiful big hardcover book. And in the description, he said, if you like Barry Windsor Smith, you will love Carlo Schwab. Well, Barry Windsor Smith was doing artwork for Conan the Barbarian comics. And his work sold for very large amounts of money. And I was thinking, I can't sell Carlos Schwab to save my life at the art shows that I'm going to. What if, and then all of a sudden, like in that moment, it all flooded back. My entire arc was through fantasy and through comic books and all of this. And so I thought, I bet there's people in that room who are going to look at this the way that I do. And so we then started doing San Diego Comic-Con, which, hundreds of thousands of people, huge pop culture event. We set up this big pavilion in the middle of the floor. And we brought a big Art Nouveau room that was an installation that we had to like send trucks out and go in days early to build. And it just cost so much money to get there. And we were there the first time, and I was oiling the furniture, and I heard two voices behind me arguing about who would win. And keep in mind, I've brought like over $1 million of art, like all of these artifacts from the World's Fair in 1900. I mean, this thing is so set up. And I'm hearing two voices behind me arguing about who would win in a fight between Wolverine and Darth Vader. And so I had a panic attack, and I thought, I'm losing every penny that I spent to get here. And I was like, I don't know if I have enough money to get home. Like, we spent.
This is what my life came to. This is where I've arrived.
Thought, oh my God. Well, fast forward. So opening night, like Charles Vess, who's a comic book artist, I think is the first person that I met there. Bud Plant, the book publishing or book distributor, was one of our first customers. And so we had such a great opening night. I got to meet so many people just in that first night that I was fans of, that knew this work, that knew the really obscure things. And Lance Henriksen, the actor, is a potter himself. And he was looking at the Art Nouveau pottery, and he knew it from the Musée d'Orsay and the fact that he could touch it. So we were finding people that were in that space, that were creatives, that had the same course that I did. And the funniest thing that happened that opening night is someone said to me, wow, this is really cool. Are you guys having a good time? And I told him, yes, we're having an amazing time. And I recounted that story. And then without missing a beat, when I told him about the Wolverine Darth Vader thing, he says, Wolverine. And I feel like I went white as a sheet. I was like having a flashback. And he says, well, because I created Wolverine. And it was Len Wein. And, that was what, for 14 or 15 years, that was what Comic-Con was for us every year, is, people like Guillermo del Toro and, the Dave McKean is someone that I've done a lot with, who I really, really respect as a human being and an artist. But all of it came from being in Comic-Con. Michael Kaluta is another comic book artist that he came up to me that first year and said, thank you for being here. And in my head, I'm thinking, you're the reason I like Art Nouveau. Your art is what, when I saw Art Nouveau. And so it was just kind of a really cool lineage. And he said that he felt like artists like from his generation were passing the torch, with someone younger coming in and kind of banging this Art Nouveau / symbolism drum. So it was a long answer, but it's really through comic.
Great.
Is where
great origin story. Yeah. And now these days you work on, basically, you talk about aesthetic. You work on the aesthetic for certain movies and sets. Is that your superhero power? There's little bits of things that I've done, but the main thing that I'm doing with film is it's half of it's archiving and half of it's creative. We're halfway filmed with a weird Western movie that's meant to be like an old heavy metal magazine. Jake Busey is like, it's like John Wick meets El Topo or something. And like there's vampires in it, and Esteban Maroto designed them for us. He designed Red Sonja's bikini in the 70s, and he was one of the main Vampirella artists. So I'm trying to do the more creative stuff. And then on the
the archiving side, we're restoring Caligula, which is that would be a whole podcast unto itself. But so the work that I've done for other people has been extremely, extremely marginal. And one of those things where you're taking a small check, knowing that what you're doing will never, ever, ever see the light of day. But, I guess that's what the industry is. And I'm not a big fan of, I like output. I know a lot of people that make a lot of money and maybe don't have a lot of things come into the world. And that's kind of in contrast with what I want to do, which is why I do so many completely bizarrely disparate things, is they all kind of work on the wheel together. But every day is something interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't, we should do Caligula. We talked about it on the phone. It's a movie I've seen many times, and I know you cringe,
so
but
distressing.
it is a disturbing movie. I don't know why. And sometimes I also like it's historically very inaccurate at sometimes, but it's a fascinating horror, fantasy, sexual, historical Roman thing.
Yeah. Well, they filmed the quick version I can give is that they filmed over 90 hours. And what happened is that the version that was released, Malcolm McDowell has been saying for, whatever, I'm drawing a blank, 40 years, that was a travesty, that what they made was a good movie. And having seen the footage, he's right. There's fantastic performances in there. And the version that we'll be releasing, not one frame is going to be anything anyone has ever seen before. Wow. Because there's 90 hours of footage. We didn't need to use, for every shot that they used, there was a better one. It's very bizarre. And there are entire scenes that they never used. Lots of pornography that they filmed on the sets when the actors weren't there to cut in. All that's gone. There's a couple other really interesting thing. I mean, one of them, the one that I feel like I can say is that there's an opening sequence that they never filmed that gives a context. And Dave McKean, who did all the Sandman covers, I mean, he's like the Picasso of that universe, is going to be doing an opening sequence for us to give all the context that the audience needs. So there's lots of weird little things. So it'll be a weird thing to bring back into the world in 2022, but it's super cool. And it's a shame that everyone involved with the movie when it was made was so at each other's throats, like meaning Bob Guccione, the director, Tinto Brass, Gore Vidal. Like there's just so much ego going on, and it could have been really interesting. But I also make the argument all the time, if it had been a good movie, I don't think we would be talking about it today. Like, how many people know Ben-Hur that are under 50? And the answer is not many, and Caligula kind of anymore. This weird thing simmering. So in some ways, like, maybe there's like a really interesting happy ending to this story, that it had all this spectacle and all the censorship cases. And but anyway, that's a whole other.
Yeah, and again, it's
Caligula. It's been like the last 2 years of my life has been
your life. It's been your existence. Yeah, Malcolm McDowell, Peter O'Toole, Helen Mirren.
Tons of Helen Mirren footage that no one's ever seen.
And she was incredible. Yeah, there was some good acting in that film. It was a fascinating experiment, if you would. So
it's interesting to hear you say that, because when I watch it, I see the bad takes. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm very curious to see what you think. I'll make sure that you see it.
Yeah, I want to see it. And it would be great. I don't with or without the porn. I'd rather have without the porn, because it's like,
there's a lot in there. Yeah, like when people have asked me, "Oh, you're taking all of it out," I was like, it's hard to, I mean, they still, there's a lot.
Roman orgies, baby. That was the deal. Roman orgies.
Like a 10-minute version, right?
Well, there's one. Yeah, it's there's enough. Like, there's a scene that is where Tiberius has collected his living statues.
Mm.
And so there's like incredible makeup with someone with 3 eyes and different things like that. And you only get like 1 second of these things. And I was looking at the other night, there's almost 2 hours of footage just of that stuff.
Oh my God.
You literally could just make a movie that's Caligula and Tiberius walking around in the, sideshow element.
So in those days, that movie must have been really expensive.
It
Just
was
like a
I
blockbuster.
believe it was twice the budget of Star Wars.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can tell because all the sets
My
and
head's
the
not
armies.
the same or twice, but it was incredibly expensive. And lots and lots and lots of money was being stolen theoretically by one of the producers. That's a whole other story. The other thing that we're doing simultaneously is we're making a documentary on the making of Caligula, because that story is unbelievable.
Wow.
But so for the last, 2 years or whatever, when I walk up into my office, I yell to everyone, "All right, I'm headed to ancient Rome." And people go, "Oh, good luck. We'll get your therapist on the phone for when you're done."
What have the
It's
Romans
fun.
ever done for us? They gave us Caligula. They gave us Caligula. So,
But it's fun to be, interestingly enough, with like, the Le Pater things that, we'll talk about tonight,
mhm.
it is all connected. Like to be like, the reason why I got the Caligula job was because I was able to see it as an artwork. Like, to me, it is a historically significant artwork. It's not about it being a movie. And so even when you asked about interest in art or mysticism, like, these things all play together. Like, you can't be interested in ancient history and literature and art and all of these things without seeing that the doorways open to these other rooms. And the more doors that you open, the more enriching any of those experiences are, in my experience.
Oh, agreed. There was no difference. Art is the act of creation. It's how we become divine and godlike and honor the divine and open those
Yeah.
doors of perception. You have that quote in your book where William Blake, to clean the doors of perception, you see everything as it is, infinite, eternal. So, and your book definitely talks a lot about it. Well, I want to show the audience the book and then we can decide which way to go, Thomas. But
Okay.
this is wonderful, people. Look at this.
I was ready for
This
a
is
screen share.
amazing.
Like,
No, this is the real McCoy, and this is right next to my Carl Jung, The Red Book, and it's a gorgeous book. It's incredibly gorgeous, and when I read it, I just get emotional because the artwork is just beautiful, and your introduction, how you lead to it, is just amazing. So, highly recommend this, guys. This is a beautiful piece of artwork in itself.
So
So when
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, we printed it so large so that we could print the artworks, like specifically Mucha's collection of Le Pater, which is like the meat of the book, so
Mhm.
they could be printed to scale. So that's why that book is so enormous. And then the soft cover that's coming out at the end of the year will be a more manageable size. But you kind of have 2 options. You can get the one that's meant to be tucked in your knapsack to go, read under a tree. And then there's the one that you kind of need
A coffee table.
you need a desk
Big
set up to be able to lay there and get into it.
Yeah. And already they're asking in the chat, where can they get this? We'll make sure to let them know at the end of the interview where you can get it, and it's definitely worth the price. Back in 2009, I bought Jung's Red Book, and it was $100, and it's some of the best $100 I've spent because, like this book, it's an event, it's an experience. Read it and meditate on it. You know what I mean? That's really takes books to what they are and art to what it should be.
I
So
appreciate that.
so happy this type of content still exists today.
Well, I tried to make it where if you just want an entertaining flip through, that it does that.
Mhm.
because the majority of the audience that I have through Century Guild is art people. And so the majority of people that bought this book are interested in it purely for the aesthetics. But of course, that was not Mucha's intention, and it's an interesting opportunity to give people all these different slivers. But then the more that you read it, there are definitely areas that you can dive into. And I really wanted people to be able to take time with the art, and I don't feel like you can do that with a little book. And it was, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the Idiot's Guide to Mystical Art and Thinking. And the one that was the hardest page of the entire book was the 2-page spread on sacred geometry.
Mm.
And it doesn't look like it. It just doesn't. But that was the thing, that getting everything into like a really essential, it's easy to do with the symbol, but how do you do it with language? Like that was the part that if I had 20 pages, it would have been easier, but that was hard. And with all of it, you know, there's all these little footsteps set in different salons and different schools of thinking, but those were all the things that Alphonse Mucha had on his path that led to him creating Le Pater. And I should also say, I guess, if people don't know, because I'm not talking maybe to some art people here, Alphonse Mucha is the quintessential Art Nouveau illustrator, and he was famous for theater posters and champagne posters. And he made this really limited edition series of illustrations that was his retelling of the Lord's Prayer. But when you look at them, they're so full of clues and keys that every book that's ever mentioned them just says, oh yeah, Mucha made up a bunch of things from his fantastic imagination. And that's completely not true. There are reasons why everything is in there. And so that's what took all the years of researching and writing to figure out, for me, what they were, and then how to explain them to other people.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely get into Mucha. How do you want to start? Do you want to show the visuals first, or do you want to talk a little bit about leading up to it? Because again, your book doesn't just show Mucha's work, but it also has sections on mystical art and sacred geometry and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. Maybe you can tell the audience about the very cool lead up to Mucha. I mean, we were talking about William Blake, and again, it's hard to understand art and mysticism, but obviously William Blake's visionary art is really influenced a whole generation's cultures itself. But
yeah,
there was a scholar who said William Blake was the first person in history to come up with his own artistic cosmology. In other words, before Tolkien, before C.S. Lewis, or all the, Michael Moorcock, and, it became where every fantasy writer or science fiction had to create the creation story of their world building, as you would call it.
Yeah.
William Blake did this in the 18th century, and nobody had done it before. But then you go, well, what about, the ancients creating their own cosmologies? That's where you get into you could say William Blake wasn't creating, he was discovering, although William Blake would say that your imagination is an act of creation with God, which is what the ancients do. So it's kind of where the art.
Imagining the time counter on this episode crossing 7 hours. You start going, and then you can talk about this, you do that. It's like, every one of these is such a rabbit hole to go down. And another thing just to throw out is that one of the things that happens a lot when, like you mentioned, a lot of the people that I've met and either done work with or been affiliated with that are through that kind of maybe comic book or fantasy world. And, one thing that has been interesting about that is you do get to meet people who you really respect their work. And sometimes it's really wonderful. And I'm going to use like Dave McKean as an example of that. Sometimes it's extremely, extremely disappointing. I will not name names there. But the one thing that happened with Le Pater that was really, mind-blowing for me is that probably my biggest influence in developmental thinking was Michael Moorcock. And when I saw the name Moorcock on an invoice for a purchase of the book, I had a little aneurysm. And so he very, very generously wrote the introduction to the paperback edition that's coming out. And so another really fantastic quote came from Roger Dean. He gave us a great cover blurb. And so that inner 12-year-old that was discovering Art Nouveau and all of these kinds of thinking, the thing that made me think of it in that moment is the idea of the multiverse. We're seeing it all over Marvel Comics right now. And Giordano Bruno posited the idea, but the idea of it in pop culture, that characters could overlap and interact with each other, that was all Michael Moorcock. And I'm sure that nobody watching What If or going to see, you know what I mean? Like, is thinking, oh, this is a Michael Moorcock thing, but it's a Michael Moorcock thing. And so it's interesting that something that has become so much a part of popular culture has its roots that recently, 1960, early 60s, 63.
Yeah.
And so because I say that because you mentioned Tolkien and you mentioned Blake, and I just think it's really interesting to live in a time where you can think before people talked about multiverse in that way.
Yeah.
And just to I guess connect it to the book thing, the reason that we put the William Blake and we go back to Albrecht Dürer is I thought Albrecht Dürer is like the first rock star of Christian mysticism. He was the first person that we know by name who was creating work that you show it to someone and today they still know it, even if they don't know his name. And you say the name Dürer and most people do know it. And so I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this statement, except to say the reason that we put Dürer and Blake and all of that is that what you said about Blake's thinking was completely necessary to where Alphonse Mucha would have been in the late 19th century, sitting at tables with people like Strindberg and meeting Albert de Rochas. They were doing spirit photography, and it was so prevalent in late 19th century thinking to be discussing William Blake, to be looking at those things and turning away from the microscope and the telescope and saying, okay, but what are the internal landscapes? And so when I would have something like from Le Pater say at an antique show or an art fair, people just would look at it and they would just see the shapes. It's like a mandala, or, and they would say, well, it's not as interesting as Mucha's beer poster. And the reason is because when you look at it, it's like, well, why is this here? What do these shapes mean? Why is this shrouded figure here? And so kind of like, it's literally the difference between an object being one-dimensional or two-dimensional or three-dimensional. And in order to really understand this beautiful, beautiful body of work that he did, you do need to know about Albrecht Dürer's symbolism and about William Blake and the salons of the 19th century. And yeah, that's why it's such a heavy book.
Yeah. And as you argue, and Paris in the 19th century was a hotbed of occultism, and these individuals, these artists, were influenced by the Rosicrucians, by the Freemasons, by the alchemists from Beme and all that. Again, the art and the mysticism was entwined. Obviously, William Blake is maybe the apex, the real flow of this power that transformed our very consciousness in Western society. And again, a hotbed was Paris in the 19th century. So this is important to know. And before we get into the visuals, how would you define Art Nouveau then? The elevator pitch.
Art Nouveau is it was an art movement that celebrated nature. after the Industrial Revolution, artists felt that technology was destroying society, and they needed
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it sounds like the treatise to the Matrix when you read their manifestos from that period.
Wow.
But they were looking at Japanism and looking at ways that art was utilizing natural elements in a way that brought nature into both the streets and living space. And so a lot of times people get Art Nouveau and Art Deco mixed up. And it's basically Art Nouveau is nature, Art Deco is technology. Art Deco is clean, straight lines, speed. And there are, there's a lot of crossover between the two, but those are what the two polar ends are. Art Nouveau is nature in art in the late 1890s, early 1900s. I'm starting to get really academic in my head because I started to say early 1900s, and then a voice said by 1900 it was over, and I was like, all right, that's different.
You're in a professor scolding you. So
Well,
they did what the Romantics did against the Enlightenment. The Romantics were kind of a reaction against too much thinking, too much ration. Art Nouveau was a reaction to the toys of the 19th century.
It was more of a philosophical reaction than an aesthetic reaction, in the sense of there were factories opening up on the outskirts of town, and so people were feeling encroached upon in a different way. That technological alienation mixed with kind of the enchantment with the idea of the Orient. There was actually a salon called L'Art Nouveau Bing. And one of the things that I got to do in the book that I was excited about is I was able to get the original photos from the museum scanned at such a scale that we could do glorious 2-page spreads where you could see in the cabinets what they were selling. But he would sell ancient Japanese artifacts next to these items that had been made just that month. And so the artists were kind of feeding off of that ancient idea of the aesthetics of nature. And so you also see a lot of medieval inspired. But the thing I was just distracted by is that in 1900, they had the World's Fair, and that introduced Art Nouveau to the world. But that's kind of like the day that you see The Cure on David Letterman. Do you know what I mean? Like it was like at that point, in a lot of ways, it was over because 8 albums or 9 albums in, once it reached when it reached the point where your dad was listening to it. And that's what it was like with Art Nouveau. Is by 1900, then everybody agreed this is fantastic. And then in 1902, you had Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the Glasgow School doing this incredibly futuristic, alien-looking, super sleek designs. And so the people that were really forward-thinking by 1902 thought Art Nouveau was
dead. Yeah, it's the same thing that happened with grunge. As soon as you brought grunge out into the world, it had a shelf life of a year or two. It just died. You can't bring this gnosis out into the masses or the Hilux. So, oh well. Vince, before we get into the visuals with Thomas, any questions for the audience?
Yeah, there's two. One of somebody wanted to know, actually, Anon wanted to know, seeing your guitar in the background, would you be willing to play something for the audience?
Smoke on the Water, House of the Rising Sun, or something.
There you go.
I'll play some Cure and some Nirvana songs.
So I'll take that as an answer, I guess. And we have one. Okay. What ancestors inspired Mucha? Can we say that they were the divine? Can we say where the divine inspiration for Mucha came?
Where the divine inspiration?
Yeah, that's what YVD asked. Yes.
I mean, that's kind of a metaphysical question. I don't know. I mean, he was raised in the church, and he did extensively. He played the violin in the church, and there's a great quote in the book where he talks about kneeling in the church and with the incense and the candles and everything, feeling that he was on the precipice of like a divine horizon or something. I don't remember the quote exactly, but so his lifelong fascination with the filter of the Christian aspects of mysticism definitely came from just growing up in Moravia and it being so devoutly Catholic. An interesting side note is that Le Pater was poorly received in his homeland. They had to change some of the text because his idea of this divine feminine and the idea of androgyny and the idea of this mystical thinking was just too weird for them. I mean, it reads more like Woodstock than it does something you'd read in the church. The whole thing is very hippie-ish. And so they rewrote the text to be, I mean, it's very, I personally am not, there's so much indoctrination in a lot of church writings, and you see it in the way they wanted him to change the thinking. But the idea was, and one of the things that the paperback has is we do have all the translations for all the Czech editions, but it takes something that's very elastic and emotional and puts a lot of power in the hands of the individual and returns it to the good Catholic way of thinking. So that's just kind of an interesting. I'm trying not to fall into a rabbit hole. I keep talking about these things and feeling like I could go for an hour. But so I think that if I understand the question correctly, I think that his influence as he perceived it would have been an evolution of the Judeo-Christian God. I think that he was raised with that, but I think that he also knew that his perception of that was not exactly what he had been reading about when he was 14. He certainly wasn't reading Michael Moorcock like I was.
I was. Yeah, actually, I have been chatting with Mr. Moorcock, which is kind of a dream come true. I mean, Philip K. Dick, Michael Moorcock are my favorite writers.
I'm afraid to talk to him.
Huh? Yeah.
I'm afraid to talk.
He's
so many people
nice.
that I adore have turned out to be just such assholes that I'm like terrified.
You mentioned over the phone. We better not say it in public. You'll break a lot of hearts. Of a lot of these are modern Gnostic occult exemplars, and but yeah, I usually don't mention Michael Moorcock on Aeon Byte, even though he is one of the like you said, multiverse chaos magic is indebted to him, and his ideas are just amazing.
He's been so generous and so funny, and I'm just like being really timid. And he wrote the most glowing introduction. He was supposed to do a back cover quote, and he said he just couldn't narrow it down and wrote this beautiful introduction that is just like the most. I mean, I try to live my life in service, and I try to I mean, I do favors for people all the time. I try to do that because I always you be the change you want to see in the world kind of thing. And there's just so many times where I feel like it's not anything I'm sad about, but I do feel like I give so much more than I might receive. And so for somebody to do something that was so selfless and to put so much time into it, it's just like, it doesn't happen often to me in this way. And the fact that not only that happened, but that it's someone that was so such a map point, a pin in the map in terms of me moving, has just been like one of the coolest things that's happened surrounding this book. And I feel like it inspires me even more to try to live in that space of paying it forward. Like I'm hoping that 20 years from now, that there's someone that sends me a book or that I say something nice about, and they say, "Oh my God, your Le Pater book totally changed my life." So we'll see.
Oh, it's an interesting world. Yeah. And it should be mentioned too. I mean, yeah, you're talking about how Mucha sees God, and I even titled this Gnostic Gods because obviously the Gnostics saw the divine beings and even the archons as androgynous, hermaphrodites, gender bending. There was it wasn't sort of like the Platonic energies, but they're very descriptive on these beings who shift. And then it's interesting. Obviously, you've got Blake and his art where it shows the male god in not very good terms. We can never forget all of the views, but Jacob Böhme was a big advocate of Sophia and thought Sophia was a force that the Trinity need and a force that Christianity needs. So I'm not saying, I'm just speculating, but in occult circles, these things were probably moving some way or another. So
that's kind of the point of the book, is that to look at Le Pater and just look at it through the lenses of Art Nouveau and Christianity, like you'll miss 90% of it. Like you have to at least know who Jakob Böhme is and know what the Invisible College is and know about Hermeticism. And so I did have one complaint. Someone left me a very, very nice review, and their complaint was that I just didn't go into these things enough. And I laughed because you could kill a small child with that book, with the way it is now. And my first draft was going to be like 450, 500 pages. The hard part was getting it down. And so I laughed because I empathized and I understood. But it's really, for those other fragments, it's meant to just be a doorway. And my hope is that people who love the art get just enough to understand this. But yeah, maybe someone is going to go read Jakob Böhme. And I mean, Flood is another one.
Oh, his work is incredible.
Yeah, and all of his. I mean, to me, that stuff is so mesmerizing. There's the one artwork that's in there, that's the D.A. Frerer, the secret. What is it? All things. My head lives in so many places. I forget phrases. It's before that.
Not sure. I don't know. Oh, well, it's somewhere. If you can think of it, let me know. I don't want to get mesmerized because, again, for anybody who reads this book, you could just meditate.
But it's one that you see a lot on the internet, and it's low resolution. And it's one that when you see it in books, it's really small. So that, to me, was one that to be able to print it so big where you can really, really read all the little script. Same thing with that drawing of the Invisible College. You know, like the detail in that.
There's some of it.
That's the Frerer one, yeah. Like so good.
Oh, it's wonderful to see it like this. All
right.
And, well, what?
I was just going to say one thing I'll share quickly is just that the Blake piece that was right before that or right after that, the image that they have from the museum, they sent it to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, actually, I really want to do a 2-page spread with this. Can you send me a larger one? So they went into the raw file and sent me like the master file. It's like, oh my guys, I'm so sorry, but I really need this bigger. How big is this book that you're making? Nobody in the world is thinking, it's 12 by 16. And so they actually went in and there were people that reshot things at museums so that we could get such incredible detail on those artworks that it really is meant to be like being able to walk through a museum.
Awesome. Well, why don't we do a little screen share and we look at some wonderful visuals.
I also have, I can pull the book up if you want me to go through some of the.
Yeah, of course. Whatever you want to share, we will appreciate.
Lock the doors. I could be here for.
No problem. Time is not an issue on this Odin's Day.
I can. Let's see if this.
All right. Yeah, you just click add to stream, or I can do it. Let's see. There you go.
Oh, down here.
We can see it now. All right.
So I guess the first thing that I can show.
You guys are looking at the book itself.
I pulled up the PDF earlier, and then I realized if I bring up the these files that we can actually go like way into the imagery. And so the thing that Mucha did that's really the most interesting is that he did 3 plates for each artwork. I'm just kind of getting to the beginning. So when, we don't even get into Le Pater until we're at like page 114. So so first of all, his vision of God is clearly not the bearded man,
Michelangelo
on a throne.
Yeah.
So, he's got this beautiful, this is why I did it on the original, because I was like, I can get way in. But that's humanity in the palm of the hand of this deity that again is very androgynous.
Very on the again the Gnostic side, and how they also revered other androgynous gods like Hermes and Dionysus, those kind of in between the world gods.
And so we've got all of his sketches, but like the idea of the pomegranate, I don't want to get too far into craziness, but like people were saying, oh, the pomegranate, well, he used that because it's a pretty image. It's like, no, he didn't. Like the idea of, I want to go into all of that, but the idea of the Ouroboros, and which I'm sure I mispronounced, and the angel holding the egg, and you've got the cosmos with nothing yet formed. And so in the book, we've got his original sketches for everything. And then for each one, he did a illuminated manuscript page, which is his interpretation of what the verse means. This is what the Czech market didn't like. The traditional market did censor this. And then for each one, he did these bizarre post-apocalyptic landscapes that are these kind of dream sequence type things of humanity. Like here's the idea of mankind, struggling in their, the mire of humanity. And then it's the eye of God that, is there. And his God is not the Judeo-Christian God. It's not the man on the throne. It is the idea of the spirituality and self-betterment. And I just thought of something as a good example. So like here you've got that idea of man encroaching through that. And then when you go back into, people are going to get whiplash here from this stuff. When you go back to the 19th century salons, I mentioned Carlos Schwab earlier, and the poster for the first Salon Rosicrucian, it's the same idea. You've got, I'll take a second to, there we go. You've got humanity kind of stuck in the mire, and it's only through ascending, you've got the burning heart, the lily of purity. It's only through ascending towards wisdom and knowledge that you evolve. So that's part of why that line of thinking does really inform. This is another Carlos Schwab illustration. That's a whole androgyny. That's another rabbit hole. Oh my God. But so with each of them, there's reason, there's all of, they just look like beautiful artworks to someone in an art fair. But anyone that's interested in Masonic thinking or Hermeticism, there's so much coding in all of these. And, just to kind of go on that tangent for a minute, Mucha wound up becoming a devout Freemason. And he created the first Czech-speaking lodge. And it's a big book. There's a lot in here. And so he created jewelry for the lodge.
Wow, and he's Catholic and he's a Freemason?
Yeah, I don't know how.
Interesting.
It's loading,
especially in those days.
Yeah, I don't know what his relationship was with the church at the end of his life, and I don't know what the relationship was like in Prague. I mean, certainly if it was in Paris, it would have been extremely complicated. But in 1919, he established the first lodge, and then 22 was when the Supreme Council for Czechoslovakia. So in 1938 is when the Masonic Lodge had to close. And interestingly enough, the reason that Hitler took him in, not Hitler personally, but the reason the Nazis took him in for questioning was because he was such a prominent public figure. And in Prague, a large part of that was because of his Masonic activities. So he was taken in for questioning. And unfortunately, he was frail. He did not die while he was in custody, but he did die shortly thereafter. So there really is a direct link to, to having been apprehended by the Gestapo.
And it was basically the interrogation was a little physical in those days.
Yeah. I mean, he was an old man, and conditions too. I'm sure that they were not
cold cells, no food, all that shit.
Yeah. So that's a very, very, it's a very sad ending to his story, but, I mean, he made so much beautiful work, and this is him in 1928. What do you want me to show you in here?
Good question. God, there's so much good stuff.
I mean, I can talk about any of it.
Something with a lot of symbolism. How's that? Like, it was loaded with symbols so that you can point out.
Yeah, just to back up, Le Pater was his exegesis or version of the Lord's Prayer from beginning to end. That was what he was attempting to do.
Yeah, it was a folio of 23 plates, a title page, the 7 verses, each one with a prayer mandala, the illustrated manuscript, the dream landscape, and then at the end there was the Amen. I mean, one thing that was interesting to me was, and this is a good example, you've got these images on the side. And so, I mean, first of all, I mean, we did make a t-shirt of this because it's so cool. The fact that he took recognizable images and put his style on it, and then some less recognizable, but each one of these correlates to the symbolism that he utilized in the plate itself. The best way that I can explain, and these lines are just my program, the best way that I can explain this body of work is that it almost works like a wheel. It's not something that you can experience in a linear fashion. To just start here and then move through, like this plate and then the next one, because they refer so much. I mean, it's not a linear book. That's the only way I can put it.
Multidimensional.
Yeah. I mean, like there are things that in the same way that knowing what the eye of providence is helps you understand that first image where there's an eye in the sky. Like, there's so many things here that kind of feed back upon each other, that to me, that's one of the most interesting parts, is that you can look at an artwork like this and just think it's incredibly beautiful. And then the more that you go through and you look at, I don't know, say you're looking at, kind of like this Cathar hammer, and you go to, I mean, actually, I'll stop here for a minute just because this one is so cool. It's also easy to get distracted in.
Getting lost in it.
Oh man. That's why we made the book so big. Like, you have to be able to get in there. But all of these crazy eyeballs floating in the ether, it looks like a psychedelic rock poster. It's from 1899. Like it's so modern in its thinking.
It is
or
way ahead of its time. Even I was looking at some of the artwork of Toulouse-Lautrec, and I don't know how big he is in the United States, but when I grew up in Mexico and Europe, he was like the rock star, and I'm like, man, his stuff is more primitive than Mucha. You know,
that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah. I'm just. Yeah.
I used to not like Lautrec, and I remember being a huge Lautrec fan, and huge Mucha fan. And this is like, I'm like in my 20s, and seeing a Lautrec poster and thinking, man, who would like this ugly? I'm trying to stop. I'm trying to not swear on your thing. And now that I'm older, with the exception of Le Pater, I actually infinitely prefer Lautrec.
Oh.
But that's a whole other long.
Yeah. Well, it happens.
It gets more into like expressionist thinking, the idea that suggestions of things, and like when I was a kid, if I saw expressionist art, I would just think, oh, that's very freaky and scary. But like the thing that changed that for me is I saw a documentary on expressionism and explaining that artists were trying to deal with the feelings of the First World War. And if you'd been an artist, and I forget who it was, but they showed like these beautiful landscapes that he drew. Then he was in a foxhole for 2 years. And then he came back and he was just drawing all these crazy squiggles. And then that opened up expressionism for me. But anyway, but so, when you look at the fact that he was utilizing that hammer with the vines coming out, and then you've got the hammer in this one, and the idea of the hammer.
Wait, can you back up the picture you were showing with the kid? Yeah.
Wait, which one?
This one? That one. What is going on there? Because that's very powerful.
This one, right?
That's an angel. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of it you can read probably some things into that might not be here in terms of the Cain and Abel idea of God appearing or something. But the basic idea in this imaginary dreamscape that he created is you've got this if you look at his face here, I'm going to utilize the fact that we've got this great, there's some Cro-Magnon features here. And so the fact that he's got this kind of ape-like man holding this hammer, and someone's begging for mercy, and then this angel shows up. And in his earlier drawings for it, he had the burning heart here.
No.
But the idea that this emissary of the deity has commanded him to stop is his way of expressing that idea of this correlates with the verse, forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And same thing here. When you look at this, you've got, she's got her hand on this head of this child, like a mother forgiving a child. Again, there's no man with a beard on a throne in this. It's all female, like all of his illustrations of the inclinations of the deity. And yeah, the flowers all connect through, and then, again, it's, and I hesitate even to say female, because when you look at, they're definitely feminine in feature, but it's not like other things he did where when he was trying to depict nature and there's breasts and things that are obviously female, like he really was leaning into the androgyny. And I'm trying not to fall down a rabbit hole. So I'm it's like, that's the point of the book, is I just,
you just get absorbed, and you get so into these images. Again, it's more of an experience. It goes beyond just eye candy or the eyes. It really stirs something within you.
Like he did this vision of Mother Earth, and she's got 3 breasts. So there's got to, there's
Like
clearly,
the woman from Total Recall?
yeah, I guess so.
The famous one. Oh, you're right. I see them now. That's so cool.
And everyone is drinking from this river of milk.
Yeah.
And it's just
wonderful.
There's no precedence for it in that William Blake way. Like there isn't, like I'm looking at this figure, there's no like, there's no like Nigerian saint that had 3 breasts or something. You know what I mean? Like it's just, he's utilizing all of these different world mythology elements and all of this esoteric thinking to articulate what he was feeling, which is obviously what art is supposed to do.
Yeah, in one section of your book, you write, the convergence of metaphysical, spiritual, artistic, and visionary reached a pinnacle in William Blake. And again, these individuals like Mucha are just, they're continuing this mystic art.
That's a great line. I'm just kidding.
Well, whoever wrote it,
that's great.
Did you get Mr. Moorcock to write that for you?
He's writing the next one. I wanted to show you this one just because this is the one that started everything for me. This is I was in an art fair, what feels like centuries ago, and I knew Mucha, but I didn't know what Le Pater was. And as someone who's a fan of fantasy art and Virgil Finlay, I don't know why my program is doing all these lines. I apologize for that. I was looking at this and it's like, clearly it's Mucha's hand. It's so beautifully drawn, but it looks like something from like a Weird Tales magazine.
Mm-hmm.
You've got like these weird hobgoblin creatures and basilisks and it was so freaky and weird. Like, look at that guy. And, but look at how delicate the faces are. And, but so I wound up buying this, and I write about it in the book, but that's what started the journey for me, was trying to research this. And back in the, wee years of the internet, there was nothing you could find. And you'd find it in books, and they would mention Le Pater as his printed masterwork, but there were never any pictures. And it was just, incredibly, incredibly rare. But to my eyes, it's impossible to look at something like this and not be intrigued. And then to find out that there's so much more, that that all of these other artworks were connected to that. It just, the cavern just kept getting bigger and bigger and more glorious the more that you got into, the imagery as I discovered it.
Yeah, it's incredible. I also noticed too, Thomas, there's Anatole France commissioned some work for Mucha. So of course it was ding, 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 because Anatole France wrote what some considered the first high fantasy or science fiction novel in history, The Revolt of the Angels. And it really is about the angels going and kicking the butt of God and how they take over the world and all that. And it's a very Gnostic novel. In fact, Yaldabaoth is a character. The Gnostic demiurge is a character. So I was enjoying these 6 degrees of separation. And then, of course, you have, who is, I forgot, who is it? Eric Satie was also part of that group. And
he was part of Rosicrucian.
Yeah, he was a Rosicrucian, and he wrote the symphony La Gnosticienne or whatever. It's kind of a word he made up, but it obviously means gnosis, and most people would recognize the tune. But it's just fascinating. You almost wish you can get on a time machine and go back to Paris in those days and soak up the culture and the art and the occultism.
This is So the Rosicrucian salon, the Salon Rosicrucian, if people aren't familiar with it, there was a man named Joseph Peladon,
Mm-hmm.
and he went by the name Tsar, or that's the title Tsar Peladon, which means magus. And he, from what we understand historically, all of his stories about traveling to ancient Egypt and finding scrolls that had given him insight into the world beyond men was all not real. He actually never left Paris. So he was definitely a showman, but he held this salon, and it was like they were the biggest rock stars in France. Their first exhibition, which is what this poster is for. The salon that they held it in normally would have 100 people show up to an opening. But for this opening, at the end of the night, they had over 22,000 people that had either signed the guest book or left a card. So they literally had a traffic stopping event for this kind of mystical art in 1892. And Eric Satie was sitting in the corner on a little pump organ playing that music you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Which again, for me is super exciting, but this is why I don't have a lot of friends.
This is world building. This is world building, inner world building and fantasy. And yeah, it always reminds me of the quote by Bishop Stephen Heller: every serious artist is already half a Gnostic. And I think that's it. You open the doorways of perception that William Blake says, and you witness eternity.
There was a guy that was at my house once who was actually, I can't remember his name. It was so long ago, but I remember he was a really, really nice guy. And he was buying a piece of art. And I was talking about this salon, and I mentioned Joseph Peladon. And I was like, I'm not sure if you know who Peladon is. And he just said, but of course, in the most dismissive way, like, what kind of animal wouldn't know about Josephine Peladon? And I just thought that was the most charming and hilarious moment that I could ever imagine. But of course I know who Josephine Peladon is. But yeah, I mean, it's all so
yeah, there's so much in this book. You can go over and over again. Vance, any questions for the audience? Please, no lizard people or Nordics or anything weird like
Okay.
that. I don't know. I don't know about Tool. I don't know if Thomas is a fan of Tool, because I know that question is always hovering somewhere.
No. All right. Well, but Nate had another good one. He wanted to know, Thomas, if you're a Freemason, and if so, when you joined.
I am not a Freemason.
Okay. And what alchemical artist is most illustrative or enlightening for you?
My relationship with that kind of art, I would say that there's two sides to it. There are artists on an emotional level, I would say it's Mucha's Le Pater, which is why I spend so much time on this. I would say on an intellectual level that the artists that were illustrating the theories of like Jakob Burma or or like Robert Flood's illustrations are things that definitely open my mind in certain ways and give me things to think about. But the thing that really, really does it most of all, I'm actually, you know what? It's funny. It's in the book. So and it's not going to be what anyone would expect. So
Robert Crumb. No. Just kidding.
The piece that really does that does all of it for me, is this vase.
You mean vase?
Yeah, when it's that expensive, it's a vase.
It's a vase.
A vase. Yes.
And I can, and it's that is not what anybody would ever expect. And the reason is that for me, when you, like, this vase represents the absence of human intellect in the face of creation. Because what happened here is that the artist who made this, which is, his name is Demus, and this was actually in Flammarion's family collection, that they did everything in the world that they could to plan what the vase was going to do. But then you mix the earth and the water, and you put it in the kiln with the fire and the air, and then you ultimately have no control over how it turns out, and it turned out beautifully. And so it's not that I'm like an advocate for the idea that we don't have control, but it's the idea of that, to me, that is the most crystalline example of the experience of alchemy in service to some inexplicable higher power. The fact that this vase, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in person, and the textures are so amazing, and it could have exploded in the kiln, but it didn't. And so that relationship between the work that he was doing as an artist and a human and a scientist and a chemist, and just so many things that are so inexplicable. So that's my answer. And like I said, it's
Great.
Wonderful.
that's really, it's really that one. It's there are certainly ones that are more obvious, and that was the first two, but that's the one where I ended up for the long term.
Okay. Chris Hamby wanted to know if Mucha is involved or interested in Victorian spiritualism.
Very. At his salon, I'm sorry, not a salon, studio. At his studio, they used to hold seances. They would, they did spirit readings. There's some photographs in the book of photographs taken of a medium in trance that was listening to music under, whatever spiritual trance she was in. And he and a man named Albert de Rochas, who was not only a spiritualist, but a colonel in the military, a very high-ranking military person, would host these salons. They put out a book on their studies. And because Mucha was successful, it was probably the equivalent of being backstage at a Tool concert, to refer to your backstage at a tour concert with Donald Rumsfeld or something. I mean, like, the guy is like a
what an analogy. That is the ultimate analogy in the world.
So, yeah, but so Alphonse Mucha was very, very, very interested in the ideas of what we would think of as Victorian spiritualism. And I only go into it for a few pages in the book, but yeah, it's very
definitely not a truly Orthodox Catholic.
No,
Catholics
and Mucha's, the books about Mucha never mention this. If you go through 20 books on Alphonse Mucha, they never mention, by the way, the guy held seances. Like, to me, that was the coolest thing. When I heard that, I was like,
not good for sales generally, right?
Yeah, I guess because, I mean, there's a good point that his stuff, if you're looking at his beer and champagne posters and you're very, kind of middle of the road, maybe you don't want to know that this guy was,
There's another dimension of him, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul Miller wanted to know if the pomegranate is a representation of the original apple in the Garden of Eden.
I think that as it relates here, it's the idea of the seeds. I think that there are people that could probably make an argument for it being the apple, but I think directly as he was relating to it, I mean, maybe the apple. I'm not going to go off on this tangent. Maybe the apple winds up representing the pomegranate, and so that's why the question exists. But I think that the pomegranate being the seminal, orb from which all of these seeds come is inherent to the pomegranate itself.
Definitely a Persephone and Hades type of symbol. And our friend Anon wants to know if there can be a Catholic Gnostic or a Gnostic Catholic.
What's up with his questions tonight?
I don't know.
Lay off the Colt 45, Anon. Come on.
Well, wait a minute. He may have been just posing that to his friends in the chat room. That may not have been meant for us, but it had a question mark.
A rhetorical question. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, an alchemy, a rhetorical question, right? All right. How about this one? This is also from Anon. Do you think Mucha's art was put forth as a means to cope with the destruction of World War I?
Wait, do I think Mucha's ask the question again?
Yeah.
I just found the comment section. I'm seeing like Tool and guitars and
you don't want to.
World War I was 14 years after all of this. Like Mucha, by World War I, Mucha was really done. He'd made a fortune and why does he keep saying now ask about Tool?
Don't worry about it. Don't look.
We have created a monster.
Who knows things I'm not going to talk about publicly, but
see, that's why I'm here. I'm filtering for you so that we can give you the best questions that are the most relevant for the show.
Are they really Tool fans, or are they making fun of it?
Well, Miguel, you started this.
Because I'll tell you this: I'm not a fan of the music, but the guys are wonderful. My personal experience, absolutely. Adam Jones has been one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Cool.
But I'm not a fan of music. But
there you go, Nate. You see that? Thomas knows your favorite band there. One last question.
There's a connection on a couple things. That's why I thought, I was like, is there a friend of mine in here trolling? They're trying to make happen.
Well, Nate also he's showing up he shows up as Occult fan in the chat. Nate is resonating with a lot of what you're saying. He said that before.
Oh, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, because he's a Freemason and a Rosicrucian. He's a Rosicrucian. You're a Rosicrucian, right? Is that right?
Me?
Thomas? Yeah.
I'm from fucking Chicago, man.
All right.
He's a Cubs fan. He's a Cubs.
No, not even.
Outside.
You know what it is? I'm personally, I subscribe to that belief of, that the things are there if you can seek it. My personal experiences on a larger scale with people that are part of some of these organizations have not been the examples of what I believe the thinking connects to. So for people that are pursuing that are finding things from it, I think that's extraordinary and that's valuable. For me, there's definitely someone who was an advanced Mason who was incredibly helpful in writing the book in terms of deciphering things. So I respect the information. I respect the idea of ritual. I respect all of these different things, but my personal practices are just so different that it's more things that I just kind of, I think, do with individuals more than like, the reason I made the Chicago joke is like, because it's when you grow up in a city like that, The Masonic Lodge is where they're serving bratwurst. And do you know what I mean? Like, you don't go in there to like have a conversation about the idea of an androgynous deity. It doesn't go well.
Planes of existence.
Yeah,
And,
like that's not what it is. So for me, that's what I always thought it was. Like, I remember a friend of mine who's a magician that was doing a thing, like a magic show for the Masons. And I was like, and he had mentioned something about how interesting some of this stuff was. And I asked him, I was like, isn't that those guys that have that VFW hall over there? And he's like, yeah, but, and it was like, that was kind of when it ended for me. So that's just, again, it's what I was exposed to. And so I respect it enough that I wrote the book, but it's not a practice that I personally have,
all right,
have pursued.
Speaking of independence, then, what's your advice for making a living as an independent artist? From DW The Wild Beat.
Oh my God. I talk about this every day because I do a lot of artist management, and it is we are at a nadir of audience appreciation for creativity. We are definitely part of a cultural moment where everybody thinks that everything should be free. Where to the point where the idea of like, if you're a craftsman, like a tangible item doesn't hold the same weight because people are looking at things on the internet and copying that, and then you get a copy of a copy. So if you're someone that, for example, really knows how to do a French polish on wood, or knows how to do leather working, or knows how to paint with oil, that is not valued as highly as something that just photographs well or looks good on a screen. So you're entering into that question with a really difficult platform for the traditional arts. I do think that things like Patreon and Kickstarter are game changers. For me as a publisher, I couldn't do what I do without Kickstarter, without the ability to directly connect with a community and rally people in that way. That's specifically, for publishing. And so, without knowing what, and trying to be really general, just to that question, the main thing that I would say that anyone has to do is be prepared to do other work other than just being an artist. And so for me, a good example is I want to make this movie, which is this Jungian fable with Jake Busey, like the Little Prince fighting vampires, but I'm doing the Caligula work because it's still really interesting, but it's but it is something that I took as a job. And then the other part is learn about business. And a lot of the artists that I meet that think of themselves as business people, that try to be business people, wind up being assholes because they're trying to be good business people. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is just to understand the business. Like if a gallery wants a percentage, or you're dealing with someone and they want a percentage, and maybe it's too high, maybe it's too low, but knowing why things are happening, knowing why markets work in the way that they do, for your, like, is your business seasonal? Well, if it is, like, meaning business of collectors, well, why is that? And so the reason I clarified the business thing is just that it's not that you have to be. There's a book called The Power of Soft that talks about people that don't want to be, cutthroat business people, but how do you learn how to articulate yourself in clarity? And what I try to do, both in my own work and in the work that I do for other people, is I always look for the win-win. I always look for it because it's always there. That saying of a good negotiation is when both parties are mutually dissatisfied. totally disagree with that. Like, I've had the vast majority of my dealings are always where both people walk away thrilled, and it just keeps expanding outward. And so, look for those relationships too. Look for people that are maybe a little ahead of you, and get some business advice from them. I don't know if any of that helps. It's obviously something I think about constantly, because it's a hard thing. It's a hard time for artists, but I guess it's always been hard. It's just
it's a good answer. You can't go over every single thing, but those are very important things. Keep your humanity, right?
Yeah. And also too, like, I had this conversation with it's funny. We're doing a book with Gail Pataki next year, and we had a long conversation yesterday. And she was talking about the frustration of being in isolation and not having exhibitions, and the way that you get kind of those little bits of fuel. And she said, I don't want to be like, Van Gogh, where like you're wealthy after you die, or like you die and then your work sells.
Or William Blake.
Yeah. And I said, okay, but think about what you just said. You just said, not that the work was celebrated, but that it sold for millions. And so we got into a conversation about that. Why was that? Well, it's the idea that if you're not getting paid for your work, then you must be a Sunday painter. You must be a hobbyist if you're not getting paid. Well, that's totally not true. You know what I mean? But that's something that's very, Gail's from Detroit, very Midwestern work ethic, right? We're raised to think, if you're not making money, think about it. Dad, I want to be in a band. Well, if you don't make, if you can't make a living in a year, you got to go get a job. Well, like, it's not one or the other. And so that's another big thing, I think, for an artist. One of my favorite musicians is a singer named Bill Fay. And Bill Fay, funnily enough, I had bought Gail this CD set of something from the Psychedelic Underground. It was a 3-disc box set. And I'm listening to it, and this song comes on called Garden Song. It blew me away. I became obsessed with the guy, to find out he just had disappeared decades earlier. He put out a record, it tanked, tried to put out a couple other things, nothing ever took. Well, then Jeff Tweedy from Wilco did a cover of one of his songs and kind of pulled him back into that indie spotlight. And then this great label out of Indiana financed him making more records. And so he's made 2 more records, which are really beautiful. But he donates every penny he makes. He does not want to know anything about the business. All of it goes to Doctors Without Borders. So here's an example of someone that, to me, is a huge inspiration creatively, that won't take a penny for his work. And when he tried to get a penny for his work, he couldn't. But it doesn't make the work less valid. But that's what we all think that. Like, so is he successful or not? He works as a janitor. I mean, he might not now because he's retired, but that's what he does. He worked like in an office doing bookkeeping, not janitor, I'm sorry. He was a groundskeeper at a church. But, like, so he's gardening, thinking about melodies, and then he goes and he plays them, and they're unbelievably world changing. Like, so where is success as an artist, I guess, is the question. And you have to just define that for yourself first. I could talk about that.
Yeah. Well, for another day,
for a long time on that.
But we definitely want to, we can continue this conversation another day. This has been a great conversation. We've probably just scratched the surface.
How many
hours? It's been amazing. Just a little over an hour and a half, an hour 35 minutes. We're only getting started, but the night, we ain't getting any younger. And but for everyone, please, support your artists, support this show, Alternative Podcasters. We are the little sparks that can really change the world and change consciousness, just like the William Blake, those cats in the 19th century in Paris. We are the ones. So please support. Please definitely get Thomas's book and work. And as I continue to say here, remind you, I am beyond the podcast and other services. I have my voiceover capabilities. If anybody needs audiobooks, games, documentaries, whatever you need, that's part of the new Aeon Byte vibe. Thomas, if those actors in that Caligula movie were pretty bad, I remember. So if you need me to redo their voice like Claudius or one of those, Claudius was just a whiny guy, and I'll even bring Tool to do the soundtrack if you let me do your voice. So that's how much I'll do it. But other than that, we can talk about Caligula another day, and I hope we do. But Thomas, people want to know, where can they get your books, or the two versions of the book, or find out more about you?
Well, the lepater.com, lepater.com is where you can get the books. It'll redirect you to Century Guild, which is the website for the gallery and publisher. And then, like, I'm on social media. I have a Patreon that's extremely remedial, and I have it not as a money-making thing. I'm trying to build a place where I can put like the behind-the-scenes stuff of what I'm making. But Patreon is so weird because it's like being in a cavern where you don't know if there's anyone in the studio. So it's weird. Like, I'm on there and I'm constantly like, is there anybody here? And then no one ever says anything. So I'm there infrequently. But yeah, the main thing is the book will be out. We're supposed to say January, but I think it'll be out in December. The paperback, the hardcover is available right now. I mean, the reason I would say this, and I'm not saying it to upsell it, if you can afford the hardcover, it is a different experience. It was absolutely engineered to be like a lecture. The paperback is meant to be an affordable version of that. And the information is all the same. It's all there. But the work that we did to get all of the extra detail in the imagery, it doesn't translate to a 9x12 book the same way it does when the book is like the size of a dorm room refrigerator. Anyway, that's it.
No, it's definitely worth it. And yeah, definitely a wonderful Christmas present for your spouse. And then you, of course, can read it. But I know that's how our minds work. But but anyway, yeah, it's been a great conversation. I love what you're doing, Thomas. I'm completely touched and moved by this great book. I will always cherish it. And really appreciate you coming on Aeon Byte, and we certainly look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was awesome. I had a lot of fun. And
Vance, I hope you had a lot of fun too.
Oh yeah, no, I'm an art appreciator, even though I haven't delved into it a lot, and that looks wonderful. That book looks just wonderful. Enjoyed seeing it and enjoyed being here with you, Thomas.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Really enjoyed it. And for those of you out there in the chat, great questions, interesting conversations. I really appreciate your support. I appreciate who you are. And there is this saying I wanted to end with, and I hope I don't botch it up. It's an artist is not a special type of person. Every person is a special type of artist. I think that's
great.
Good way to end. So, and I forget who said it, but every one of you is an artist. Every one of you has gnosis, and every one of you is simply wonderful, an image of the divine. So I'll end that on a positive note, and probably go listen to some Tool tonight and The Cure too. My children will see the dad bod moving to The Cure, and we'll see how that goes. But anyway, Thomas, thank you very much for coming, and hopefully we'll have you on sooner rather than later, and good luck with all your projects.
Thank you so much, guys. And thanks to everybody for the great questions. I appreciate it.
They rocked. All right. Good night, everyone. And hello and goodbye as always.